we're back. Dan Hope, joined by Andy Anders for our second press coverage of the day. If you watched our episode earlier, we talked about the possibility that Ohio State could hire Jake Diebler and how it was expected to make a decision between Jake Diebler and Dusty May. That decision has now been made, as Ohio State is expected to promote Jake Diebler. The word as of Saturday night, coming from multiple reports, that Ohio State is in the process of negotiating a contract with Jake Diebler to be its next head coach. We had a source tell us as well that that is true, and that Ohio State is going to promote Jake Diebler, assuming all goes as expected with the contract negotiations. And so, Andy, you've been covering this team all year. You've seen this run that Ohio State went on under Jake Diebler. What are your initial reactions?
Yeah, as a journalist, you always want to keep it fair, right? From my honest evaluation here is that this has an equal potential to be good and bad. I think that I really like Jake as a person and really like interviewing him as a coach. Normally, when you say that first, it's to say, but there's I don't want to make it sound like I'm about to write the guy off. So maybe that was the wrong place to start by saying he's a good person. Let me rewind and say he's proven he can coach in game, Dan. For these 8 games at least, he has gotten more out of this lineup than Chris Holtmann did. He has made good in-game adjustments. Ohio State has handled some of the mid-tier opponents really well down the stretch. I think, you look at the emotional high of that Purdue win and snapping the program worst 17-game road losing streak they had in buzzer beater fashion at Michigan State. Those are awesome moments. But I think what really impressed me about Jake is that they were able to close out games and beat Rutgers as dominant as they did, beat Michigan as dominant as they did. Iowa wasn't really close down the stretch. They pulled away a little bit from Nebraska. I mean, I think the way they closed games and the way they handled themselves in game, Diebler showed he at least has the ability to be a really good in-game coach who uses good lineups, makes good adjustments, keeps his guys focused and motivated. He got Roddy Gale Jr. to another gear defensively, got some other guys to another level that they hadn't been at this season. All that being said, we talked about it earlier. Everything else that goes into being a head coach, he hasn't had that experience yet. Now, apparently the boosters are willing to back him with their wallets. That's a part of this, that he'll have to experience in the offseason, but it's also offseason development. A guy who's going to have to oversee all that goes into an offseason of preparation, of training, of developing guys. Being a head coach as a recruiter, he was Holtmann's lead recruiter, and they brought in 2 top 10 classes in 2022 and 2023. But now Jake's got to be the guy running the show and selling the players on his program, not Holtmann's. And clearly Holtmann, for all his flaws as a coach in season, was able to sell players on playing for his Ohio State program. And now Jake Diebler is going to have to do the same thing. He's clearly got an ability to develop a relationship with guys. I think it's clear he's got a close connection with his players. But there's also small sample size, right? I mean, 8 games, how much exactly can you buy into these results? Clearly the administration is, and I don't think, I don't have any evidence that you shouldn't believe what Jake has put out there. These 8 games have been impressive, but as the sample size grows, you can find out more things, more flaws, more teams learn more about how Jake Diebler plays basketball. They're going to have an offseason to study how Ohio State played basketball down this stretch, this more aggressive play style, rolling more depth, doing those things. So for me, I think I'd just be a little cautious, I think, to just be totally bought in and completely sold that this is going to be a home run, because he doesn't have that track record. So for me, that's where I'm at, Dan. I think this has an equal potential to be a really good hire or a bad hire that maybe sets Ohio State back if Jake can't replicate what he did down the stretch of this season.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history, I mean, even if it, football, basketball, whatever sport, and I would anticipate this will be something you'll probably write about here in the coming days. When you look at the history of, interim coaches being promoted to head coaches, there's mixed results there. Now, granted, Ohio State's done it on the football side too. There's actually some parallels here in terms of, Jake Diebler taking over for Chris Holtmann, much like when Ryan Day took over for Urban Meyer. Now, these programs are in two different positions. Ryan Day was taking over a program from Urban Meyer, but was already at a point where it was expected to be a college football playoff contender every year. Jake Diebler's taking over a program that has missed the NCAA tournament in back-to-back years. And so it's a little bit different in that regard. Jake Diebler has to prove this is not a maintain kind of move. This is, you now have to build this program and take this program back to where it's supposed to be. And we'll see, does he have the chops to do that? But certainly the first impressions have been positive. You look at, I posted a poll on 11 Warriors shortly after the news broke. Is promoting Jake Diebler the right decision for Ohio State? 81% of our readers said yes. So clearly the fans, for the most part, are bought into this move. There's certainly, I think, a lot of buy-in from former players and from boosters, like you mentioned. And those things are all very important when you are, trying to build a program, trying to, rally a community around a program. So I think Jake has all of those things going for him. But now, it's about, building the roster for next year. Certainly, I think this is going to help in terms of roster retention. But like you said, I mean, they still got to go. They got to go add talent from a transfer portal. They've got to do the things that they need to do in order to make the next moves. And now it's going to fall on Jake Diebler to be that guy. But, I think ultimately, the way things just unfolded over the last month, it just became more and more real for him to get this job. And I don't think either of us expected this was going to happen as of a month ago. I mean, you were on record a couple weeks ago saying he was going to have to make the Final Four to get the job, and now he gets the job without even making the NCAA tournament. But these things can change quickly. I mean, I do believe that at different points that Sean Miller had a real chance to get this job, that Dusty May had a real chance to get this job. And these things are a two-way street too. Ohio State may have come to this decision in part because other guys they wanted weren't going to accept the job. And so that's part of it too. As we've talked about before, this isn't quite the same as Ohio State football, where you expect to go get the A1 candidate out there. Ohio State was going to have to compete with other schools for Dusty May, for any of these other coaches they want, to feel like they already had a guy who could be the guy on their staff in Columbus already. I think that created more of a sense of urgency to just make the move, especially now that Ohio State isn't going to be in the NCAA tournament this year, and the transfer portal opens up Monday. To be able to make this move now and have that stability to likely stave off at least a significant wave of players entering the transfer portal. There's still going to be some movement both ways. That's just the way it is in college basketball. But to likely be able to, mostly keep this thing intact is certainly a positive for, Ohio State, at least in the short term. Ultimately, this move is going to be judged on the long term and what Jake Diebler can build this program into over the next 3 to 5 years. And as we talked about before, you can't treat this as a one-year tryout. If you're making this move, you've got to commit and believe Jake Diebler is the guy. And I think Ohio State does believe Jake Diebler is the guy. But, we will see how it ultimately plays out over the next several years.
Yeah, I think step one for me, just like you said, transfer portal opens on Monday. What is his strategy in terms of acquiring talent from the portal? I think that there are certainly areas of this team that you're going to need to address. I think you would like to get some wing scoring to replace Jamison Battle. I know Scotty Middleton with another year of development could help replicate some of that, but you need a guy out on the wing to be that guy. I think you could use another really good big in this lineup, especially if Zed Key doesn't ultimately stick around for another year. There's going to be key holes to fill. Guard depth is another that stands out, perhaps, if so there's going to be holes to fill in the transfer portal how big of a swing and a hit can Jake Diebler get? Because we know very well Chris Holtmann's transfers certainly had, I would say, more misses than hits. For every Jamison battle, you had a Tanner Holden or some, there were a lot of transfers that didn't live up to their expectations under Holtmann. So what does Jake get in the transfer portal, and what does he get out of those players once they're in Columbus? Because it's just an important part of building a roster these days. Ohio State's next recruiting class is pretty much already set with Junie Mobley, Colin White. So I think that is the first piece for him to hit the ground running here, and also kind of set the tone. What is his strategy going onward? One of the things I really appreciate about covering Jake is he is a very, very open person and very honest about his dealings, about his methodologies, about what is said behind the scenes, about Ohio State's approach to things. So that'll be one of my first questions for him the next press conference we get, which I'm sure will be soon, after this news has been broken, and obviously Ohio State's still ironing out the contract details and finalizing things. But that'll be one of my first big questions for him. What's the approach to the transfer portal? Obviously, what's the aim in terms of retaining guys? And in the future, if you think you can upgrade certain positions, what is his loyalty like? This is a guy who is very much about connection and trusting his players. Is he willing to look at areas where maybe Ohio State has, someone who's okay, but they could do better in the portal? And so I think this first transfer portal cycle for Jake will be extremely interesting now that he is the full-time head coach. And also, what does his staff construction look like? I mean, they're going to do they keep the same staff? Obviously, Terrence Dials was sort of promoted into into more of an assistant coaching role behind the scenes after Jake was promoted to fill that sort of extra slot and apple round. Does he change the staff up at all? Is he forced to? Maybe guys leave. So that's fans I don't think assistant coaches in basketball get as much attention as they do in football. But that's still an important thing behind the scenes of how's Jake going to construct his assistant coaching staff for his first year. So those are a couple of things that you're going to want to watch right off the bat in terms of what Jake does in his first few weeks now as full-time head coach. And I guess too, how they play in the NIT, because that's still a thing that's happening.
Well, yeah, you would certainly think they would accept the NIT bid now that if Jake Diebler is going to be the head coach, and maybe that was part of the whole, we'll decide as a team, like what's going to happen there. Because, if you're bringing in a Dusty May as a head coach, then, it might not have made as much sense to play in the NIT just because you're in such a time of transition. You'd think now if Jake Diebler, this is a great opportunity to continue building momentum for next year. And so you would certainly think they would play in the NIT. To your point about, staff construction and transfer portal philosophy, I do think you want to see Jake make his own stamp on the program now. I mean, we saw things didn't work the way they needed to under Chris Holtmann. So I don't think it would be a great sign if he just decides to keep the status quo. I think you'd like to see Jake bring, and I'm not singling out any one specific assistant coach saying this guy should be fired or anything, but I do think that he should bring in some new pieces to put his own stamp on the program, because he needs to prove he can do that now. He needs to prove now that he can go out and hire assistant coaches, that he can go get players from the transfer portal. These are all things now as a first-time head coach that he has to prove he can do. We've seen the in-game coaching part. Now we've got to see all the rest of it. And certainly you would think that he has had conversations with both Ross Bjork and Gene Smith that have given them confidence that he is up to the task of taking on those responsibilities.
Yeah, I think it is important for Jake, to make his own mark and to set his own waves here. But I also know, just talking to him, he's always been very appreciative and very vocal about how much he credits the staff behind the scenes for the turnaround Ohio State experienced under his leadership during the season. So I wouldn't expect a complete overhaul. If people are expecting a completely new roster of assistant coaches, I'm not sure that's coming, but a few adjustments just to tweak things. And again, I think overall vision questions are obviously going to be a part of the next time we talk to Jake. That must have been something that he sold Ross and Gene on, to your point, about what he believes is best for this program going forward in terms of approach, maybe a change in culture, maybe a change in just mentality, just trying to replicate that aggressive style that worked for them so well down the stretch of this season. So I think grander vision questions and exactly how much he feels need tweaked, because I know the people out there are obviously going to want big changes from whatever Chris Holtmann did. Just because that's the nature of a coach going out that wasn't popular. But how much does Jake feel needs shifted, needs altered in the program, needs completely revamped? And he does need to put his own stamp on it. That is absolutely true. I'm just curious, what that looks like. And so that'll be another question for him the next time we speak.
Well, we'll have a lot more coverage to come on Jake Diebler becoming Ohio State's basketball coach and everything that's next for Ohio State basketball, because as we talked about earlier, when you have a coaching change, you're going to have other changes too. So we certainly expect it to be an eventful next few weeks for Ohio State as the off-season kind of, there's still the NIT out there, but, the off-season will kind of start and the Jake Diebler era will officially start at Ohio State. And it will certainly be interesting to see how that plays out for Ohio State basketball over the next several years. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.